Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the Main Idea podcast, where today I will not be sitting down a guest, but will once again be hosting a solo episode. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you to everyone who, since the last solo episode, has gone and rated this show 5 stars. It helps so much with organic placement and getting this show in front of people who value human performance, strength training, and of course, jujitsu. You guys are going in there, you're sharing this with friends, and it's starting to really help out the show. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Today's episode is going to be broken up into different parts. So, as I said before in the last one, if there's a specific part you want to listen to, feel free to just jump there. There's timestamps in the show notes, as well as links that will be mentioned in the episode itself. So, feel free to skip around, jump back to different parts that you find interesting. But for the rest of you that are into the conversation, feel free to stick around for the entire thing and just listen to it straight through. So there's a couple of main topics that we're going to talk about today. One has to do with footwear, with training. In my years of experience as a coach and someone who's spent a lot of time training myself, there are very specific things that I like to address with regards to footwear when I'm strength training, especially when the strength training is specific for a sport. I'm going to break down a little bit of the injury that I went through back in February, the protocol to come back from that, and where it's at today. I'm also going to cover a little bit just about mindset with injury. If you're someone who is an athlete or you do athletic things, you play multiple sports, you train jujitsu, it's almost inevitable that someday you're going to sustain some type of injury. So getting in the right headspace to be able to handle that becomes really important, because the more that you can prepare, the less you're going to have to deal with it when it actually happens. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is hips. The hip mechanics and why it's such an important part of training. It should be a staple in everybody's routine, especially if you like to do something like train jujitsu. So we'll talk about all these different things as we go through the episode. And if you feel obliged, I'm doing these episodes about once a month solo. So go and throw a comment or a response to a question underneath the show on Spotify. It's really nice to be able to engage with people directly on the show. And they finally opened up on Spotify the ability for me to respond directly to audience members. For about a year and a half, people were submitting questions and reviews, but there was no way for me to respond. I can now do that. So it's really fun to engage with you, the listeners. So feel free to do that, and I will get on it. All right, let's get to the episode. So I think the most important thing to do when you're talking about footwear and training is to first bring up why it matters at all. You look at different sports, and almost every sport has a specific type of footwear or lack thereof that the athletes perform in. So if you look at sprinters in the Olympics right now, if you look at wrestlers, if you look at skiers, everyone's wearing a different type of footwear specific to their sport. Same is true for Olympic weightlifting with the heel lift or the platform underneath the shoe. And all of these different pieces of footwear provide athletic advantages and performance advantages that are hopefully legal within the sport. Oftentimes they provide safety. So in the event of Olympic weightlifting, that block underneath the foot, it increases ankle range of motion so you can get deeper into a squat, but it also provides a sturdy platform for competitors to secure these insane loads of weight. If you look at sprinting, the cleats on the bottom of the shoe, they allow to dig in more to the track so that you can generate more force and run faster. So footwear becomes a very important part of training. This is also true for things like CrossFit, where they have these hybrid shoes like the Nike Metcon that has pieces of plastic on the inside for rope climbing, but you can run in them and they support that. But at the same time, they're flat footed, zero drop, heel to toe. So you can do things like Olympic weightlifting and do it relatively safely. So each of these pieces of footwear has a different application in their sport. And one of the sports that I love the most is jujitsu. And jujitsu doesn't have footwear. You play it without shoes on, right? So whether you're doing stand up or you're on the ground, you're not wearing footwear when you're actually doing the activity. Wrestling is often trained in wrestling shoes, but they also compete at the highest levels with shoes on. There's various reasons for that that could be explained on another episode. But for this one, if we really hone in on jujitsu for the next little bit of the conversation, you start to ask yourself, how should I be wearing things when I'm in the gym, right? If you were going to build strength in a movement like the deadlift, ultimately you want that to transfer to the sport that you love to do most. It does not mean at all that if you build a deadlift in a Nike with a lift under the heel, that it'll never be able to show up in the sport that you love. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is, if we can get as close to the sport as possible and train our muscles and tendons and ligaments and our skeletal system to get used to that, now we have somewhat of an advantage when we get to the sport. An example would be if all the change of direction, box jumping, plyometric work, front squat work, and back squat work is performed in, we'll say, a Hoka, it's just a brand of running shoe with a really big lift under the heel. And then you go to jiu-jitsu training and all your strength has been built on this really unstable, weird, not anatomically normal position. And then you go do something on the mats. I would gather that your risk of injury is slightly higher because you're now training outside of that safety net. So what I started doing a long time ago, outside of training barefoot, because more than anything, it's not allowed everywhere. In the comfort of my own gym, I can train in whatever I want. But if you are someone who's going to a gym or you're going to a training facility, you're going to a CrossFit studio, or you're training at a friend's house and you have to wear footwear or you want to wear footwear, something like this shoe, for those watching on YouTube or on Spotify video, is incredible. I found Vivo Barefoot about, 7 or 8 years ago, and they were what I would consider a fashionably acceptable version of those 5-finger toed shoes, which absolutely drive me nuts. So this shoe, if you look at the design, there's zero drop from the heel to the toe. So it's a flat line, which if you look at the anatomy of the foot is pretty similar. Granted, you have the arch of your foot, which they try to replicate here as close to actual anatomy as possible. And then when you look at the top of the shoe down, this toe box is extremely wide. Why this is important is that it allows your toes to splay outward when you're training. The more that you're weightlifting and the older you are as a weightlifter, you really start to become in tune with the muscles on the bottom of your foot and how much your engagement against the floor creates a more stable platform for you to produce force off of. So if you're going to pull a deadlift load, activating against the floor, creating stability in your arch, stabilizing your ankle, and then going up the chain through the knee and the hip become easier the more anatomically normal your footwear is. And that brings me to another really important point here, which if you follow any of like Gray Cook's work, for example, there's this joint by joint theory of stability and mobility. So if you look at the ankle joint, it does flexion, extension, eversion, inversion, rotation. It's a very mobile joint. It does a lot of movements if it's healthy. Obviously, if injury happens or there's acute trauma, it can start to restrict that. But for the most part, the ankle joint is a mobile joint. If you go up the chain to the knee does allow a little bit of rotation, which I spoke about on episode 143 with Dr. Kickass. It's an awesome episode linked in the show notes here. He was also on episode 89. There's a little bit of rotation in the knee joint, but for the most part, the knee joint just flexes and extends. And so you want that joint to be pretty stable through movement. When you go above the knee joint to your hip does this just like the ankle, flexes, extends, internally rotates, externally rotates. It does many things. So it's a complicated joint. So if you look at the anatomy of the leg from the floor up, you have a mobile joint, a stable joint, and a mobile joint. If you're training in unstable footwear, this instability starts to move up that chain into a joint that you don't want it, your knee. And if you look at something like jiu-jitsu, what do people have tons of problems with? Knees and their neck. So if you look at the knee joint, we should be doing everything that we can to create good stability in that joint. And it starts at the ankle. It does not start in your quad muscle. So you don't build stable knees by just doing quad extensions, front squats, and back squats. You build stable knees by having a mobile ankle where the foot can engage on the ground and create this platform for you to create force and drive it into the ground to do exercises, whether that's clean pulls, front squats, back squats, deadlifts, kickstand deadlifts, quarter deadlifts, RDLs, whatever it is, kettlebell swings. The more that you can engage on the bottom of your foot, or the more flexion you can get in your toe comfortably to produce force in a direction. So you can think of like a sprinter off a block or doing a landmine throw or a quarter turn jerk to press with a landmine, that ability to quickly stabilize is something that actually shows up in jiu-jitsu all the time. It also shows up in wrestling, but again, they have specific footwear for that. So when I'm in the gym and I'm training, I'm trying to get myself as close to the things that I like to do. I love to surf, I love to train jiu-jitsu, and I love to strength train so that I can do those other two things really well. Because of that, both those things being barefoot sports, it's in my best interest to train as close to barefoot as possible. And sometimes I do. I just train in my actual, birthday suit. But oftentimes, due to weights being able to fall, too much sweat in the gym because it gets hot and then it becomes slippery, I like having a shoe like this that's really malleable. Look, I can fold this shoe all the way up into my hand here, again on the video. It's breathable. It acts almost like a sock with a bunch of durability, and it really lets you build confidence in your foot position. So now if I'm on the mats with somebody and they shoot a double leg and my one foot kicks out into a sprawl position, I plant on my toe, I can trust that the tendons and ligaments in my foot and the mobility of my ankle, stability of my knee, mobility of my hip, all those will work together and create ultimate stability so that I can prevent the takedown, get the sprawl, and transition the position. If I have no flexion in my toes, I have pain in the bottom of my foot, I get cramps in the bottom of my foot when I'm doing lunges, they're all balled up, there's plantar fasciitis, all this stuff, and my knees hurt, I'm not going to have a lot of confidence on that sprawl position when someone shoots a double leg. So this is not a sponsored post. Viva does not sponsor the show. I do not get kickback for this. This is just purely a shoe that I absolutely love, that I've trained in for years. And I think that they can have a huge impact on how you train, if nothing else than to expose you to how your foot actually feels against the ground. Because as someone who's been able to maintain strength training for a long time in my life without serious injury, the better you can establish that relationship between yourself and the floor, the better opportunity you're going to have to get stronger. And footwear like this helps you build that proprioception. There's plenty of other companies out there that do it. Ultra Running has Ultra, that's ALTRA, has a really good zero drop shoe that's close to this if you're looking for a hybrid. There's a couple other brands that I'm not too familiar with. I think New Balance had one called the Minimus. That was like my first shoe ever that was zero drop. But you can find a good minimalist training shoe that's like this, that helps you build proprioception against the floor, helps you start to establish that connection of stability and building that up the chain of strength as you go through the different joints in your body, so that to the best of your ability, you can help to mitigate injury. You cannot eliminate it. You cannot avoid it 100%, but you can start to train intelligently so that you can minimize that risk over time. All right. So let's chat about this injury. So in the show notes, you can link to the website, www.maynideapodcast.com. By the time this airs, there will be a blog post up there with my actual prescribed cervical rehabilitation neck program. This is credit to Drew Courtney over at DBC Fitness in San Diego. I owe everything to him and Casey Parlett. They have a fantastic gym over there, really knowledgeable people. I have been in this industry for 10 plus years, and these guys absolutely have it dialed. Casey has a fight background. Drew's one of the most knowledgeable physical therapists that I've been able to work with. They absolutely took care of me, and we were able to basically rehab an emergency room type neck injury in around 6 weeks. So I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. But if you want access to exactly what I was doing and what I still do, which are kind of pieces of this that I've cherry picked, you can visit that. There's also, like I said, episode 89 and episode 143 in the show notes with Dr. Kickass, aka Mike Pikarski. He is a physical therapist that works directly with mixed martial artists. He's also had a fight career. He's a black belt. This guy really knows his stuff as well. So you can look through both those episodes to get insights into cervical neck health, lumbar health, stuff like that. So I've been training jiu-jitsu since 2019. I do it religiously, 3 to 4 days a week, every single week, whether I'm home, whether I'm traveling, it doesn't matter. Created a podcast around it. It's a really big part of my life. And so is strength training. So I've always done the two together. Strength train my body so that I can perform in jiu-jitsu. In February, I was training no-gi, and I had a cervical issue from a bad takedown that I did in a tournament where I shot and I got whiplash. You can see it in a video. I've talked about this before on the podcast. It basically was like a bad stinger, and I just didn't give it the time to heal. So back in February, I was training no-gi, got done with training, felt fine, just a little bit of stiffness. By the time I got home, I had referred pain down into my tricep, which is a very common symptom. Tricep and then the fingers going numb if you have compression at the disc or herniation around C6 and C7. So you look at those top vertebrae there, 6 and 7, right in between them, will refer out pain down into the tricep. And it feels like numbness, tingling. Sometimes you lose strength. Like if you do a push-up, you can't maintain the position or you fall to the ground. So that started to happen. And that night I woke up in the middle of the night. I mean, I had not been in, I don't know if I've ever been in conscious pain like this in my life. I had chest surgery when I was 16 that was very invasive. It was about 8 hours of surgery, and the rehab for that was really intense. They had a metal rod stitched inside my chest that I still have. And then it was another post-op surgery later to get that removed. And that was really painful, but it was painful in a different way. This was like excruciating. I could not lay down flat without, I mean, shooting up out of bed. There was one position that I could be in. If I got all the way into a deep squat, I looked at my left knee and curled my head down. Was the only way that I could alleviate this tension. And this just ramped up over a 12-hour period to the point where I was essentially incapacitated. And I, knock on wood, I have, never been to an emergency room in my life. That's not true. One time for a broken finger, I did go to the emergency room because the thing was, you can actually see it here. This finger is still never the same, but it was about 45 degrees off my hand, not like this. So I did go for that, but not something that I look to do. Very rarely do I want to spend any time in a hospital. So to accept that I needed to go to the emergency room was really admitting the severity of how this felt. And to be fair, it was really scary. I mean, going to emergency room for a neck injury, everything I like to do involves my body. I couldn't imagine being in the position of being on a surfboard. That was out of the question. Jiu-jitsu obviously seemed like it was potentially forever out of the question. And went to the hospital. They do what they do in the emergency room, which is they try to make you comfortable, which is usually done by way of administering significant doses of narcotics. So they gave me morphine and had me lay there. Ended up coming up with a discharge and PT recommendations and some painkillers, stuff that I really didn't want to take. And it was no more than 24 hours later, I was at another emergency room, this time to try to get an MRI because the pain had doubled. It was keeping me up, in the middle of the night. I couldn't get more than 10 minutes of sleep. I could only lay down on my side in very specific positions. So this whole thing sucked. It was very, foreign for me. I've not been ever in my life in a position that was not elected, where I was looking at taking serious time away from doing all the things that I like to do. The second emergency visit that I went to literally gave me Valium and fentanyl together to relax me enough to be able to lie me down flat and insert me into the MRI, the claustrophobic MRI too, not the small one, the big one, in the head carriage so they could actually get images of my spine. And what came out of these images was C6, C7 herniation and spinal stenosis, which is, if you think of your vertebral column, inside is where the nerves are, and the cartilage is the circle on the outside. And then there's the jelly inside of the donut, right? So these discs compressed and they opened up like this on the side of C6 and 7. That protrusion of the jelly, that cartilage, pushed against the nerve, and that nerve referred pain down into the forearm, down into the fingertips. It really just felt like my hand was a hot pot, like hot iron. It was burning. It was so excruciating. And there's nothing you can do about it, because until that pressure comes off the nerve, there's no way you can't cup it. You can't do acupuncture on it. It has to reduce the inflammation before it'll reduce the pressure. And once the pressure reduces, then the pain will start to subside. And I had made this error before. When I had that stinger the year before, I went back to training a little bit early when honestly I shouldn't have. So this one really stopped me in my tracks. And that's when I knew, and this is a very important part of this whole conversation, there comes a point in injury, especially with jiu-jitsu or something that's complicated like combat sports at all, where you have to refer out to someone who knows more than you. And the internet is not the place to do that. A professional is the place to do that. Because when you go to someone who knows about the body, about physiology, about anatomy, and they're a professional in the practice of physical therapy, they can help you do two really important things. One of those is manage your timeline. The second is prescribe the right exercises and movements to get you through that timeline as efficiently as possible. Because what usually happens when people get injured, they go online, they go, hey, these are my symptoms. What do I do? And you're going to get a million different responses from a million different people who had a million different outcomes. Some who had super severe injuries, some who didn't have super severe injuries, but you'll never get access to what the true diagnosis was for that person. And so you won't really know if that's actually what you should be doing. That's why getting with someone like I was fortunate enough to work with Drew. He did an entire assessment on my body, got hands-on, looked at how everything was moving, what things created pain, what pressure points created pain, where the pain was referring, and then took his expertise and his knowledge from doing this for a career, and we came up with a plan. And an important part of that plan for me was a return to sport, returning back to jiu-jitsu. But I had no idea what that looked like. I couldn't even stand up all the way. So his expertise put me at ease because I could now trust in someone else who knew more than I did. And I could believe in the timeline that he knew would work. And I could offload the stress and responsibility. So that brings me to this post-injury protocol. And this became instrumental, right? So for me, it was really important to be around jiu-jitsu. So I still went to training. I still watched training. I don't expect that everyone would want to do that or have the time to do that, but it was important to me to be there, to be able to learn in a different way. And if you can't physically do it, you can learn a lot by moving. I use this practice often whenever I'm injured, varying degrees of severity, but to be able to actually go and just watch training, see what your training partners do, pick up on things that you're not aware of because usually you're the one doing it, so you don't get those eyes. So I would do a lot of that, but with Drew, we came up with a protocol for every day. Every day I had exercises that were built to me to help me move through this. And those are exercises that I'm going to share in the event that someone doesn't have access to, a high level PT, doesn't have the disposable income to reach out to someone or hire someone like that. So those exercises are there on the website as an example. Again, they are specific to me, so it might not be the best thing for you. The best thing would be to look at those, consult with a physical therapist or a friend who works in that industry, and then come up with a good plan. But in this instance, we came up with a protocol for every single day. And this is the hardest part about physical therapy. And being a trainer who's worked alongside physical therapists and with clients for over a decade, I've seen at this point hundreds of people fall short on their recovery because they return to sport too soon, because they start to feel good. And here's the challenging part of recovery. Your brain will always think that you're better off than the tendons and the ligaments and the capacity of the joint that got injured. Always. So you'll hit a stride after a couple weeks where you're going, I feel pretty good. Like the pain's not there anymore. I'm totally good to return to sport. You're not. You're good to return to sport when the physical therapist green lights you based on the screening that they do, not just feel. So we came up with something that I would do 20 minutes every single morning, and another protocol that was more mobility stretching based that I would do at night. Exercises are linked on the site. And this became, to me, a little bit of a beacon because I could go into the gym in the morning and I could do something. I couldn't load a barbell. I couldn't rack a deadlift bar. I wasn't loading anything on my spine during this time. And for the most part, I was just working on being upright without generating too much pain, trying to create length in the cervical and get back rotation without impingement. So this ability to be able to do this little protocol every morning became really important to me. And it was something I looked forward to do because I felt really grateful that I was able to do it, that this wasn't an injury that sidelined me for the rest of my life. This wasn't an injury that stopped me from doing jujitsu for the rest of my life. So I was very fortunate and very grateful that I could go into the gym every morning. I could do this. With these exercises, they become very monotonous because they're not exciting the way that doing a strength exercise is. Strength gives you tons of gratification. One day the bar weighs a certain amount of weight, you keep working hard. Another day it weighs more and you can do it. You couldn't do it before and now you can. With corrective exercise, you don't get that instant gratification. It's ranges of motion. So maybe one day you feel just looser in general, and so you get more thoracic rotation than you did before. Maybe one day you slept worse the night before, and so you go to do your thoracic rotation and you're only getting a fraction of the range. And so you think you're regressing, but you're not. It just has to do with sleep. So it becomes really important to develop a mindset through this, that every day that you show up and you do it, you're making progress. And that progress gets echoed by working with a physical therapist who can show you, yes, what you're doing is working and here's why. Hey, these exercises are great. We're going to keep them. These ones you've progressed beyond. Let's move them forward. And we did this periodically. Every 2 weeks when we would meet again, we would reduce or add different exercises off that list. And what it came up to at the end was the last 2 weeks of this 6-week block, I was greenlit to flow roll again. The challenge with flow rolling is, depending on your partner, it might not be a flow roll, right? You start with good intentions and all of a sudden things ramp up. So I developed a strategy to enforce flow rolling, and that was mouth tape. So whenever I'd go into flow roll, I'd always wear mouth tape, and that would limit my intensity a lot, because if I couldn't breathe, then I can't roll. So wearing mouth tape would help me reduce the intensity while I was training. And then I was just extremely selective with my training partners. I would only train with people that I've trained with a long time, people that I trust, and people that were aware of the injury, because you need to limit the risk. And that was a really important part of being able to feel like I was getting to get back to the sport that I liked, because I was just doing it at a reduced capacity. This just kept going on until at about 6 weeks following this double back-to-back ER visit, we did a movement screen and the pain was gone, and more strength had actually been built in that joint between the neck and the shoulder girdle because of the correctives and the consistency, that now I could go into the sport and feel actually more confident than I did before. And on top of that, I gained perspective, which is an important part of injury prevention and injury recovery, because the more perspective you have on what it's like to be hurt, the more you're going to be cautious. And it doesn't mean that you have a cop out for every single thing that you do, but you become more cautious and intentional in how you train. I still train really hard, but I've adopted principles and practices that help me limit when and where the highest of the high intensities happen. Things like using a Morpheus strap for recover or for conditioning splits, using Garmin to track sleep. If my sleep is off and my recovery windows aren't being met and my HRV is plummeting, then I know it's probably not a good day to go in and spar full clip. That's not perspective that I had prior to the injury, because I didn't care. So when you go through these injuries and you make a recovery, it gives you the opportunity to develop new systems so that you can keep doing this as you get older. And one of the biggest things that I walked away from this injury recovery was really paying attention to how I feel on the day of training. Because when you step on the mats, the vibes are good, man. And everyone wants to train hard, and you're with people that you love and care about, and they're your teammates, and you're disconnecting from all the other stuff in your life. And it's really easy to push yourself. And that's a good thing. It's awesome to have an environment that can create that kind of motivation and that kind of drive and that kind of place where you can do that safely. But when you're trying to mitigate the risk of injury, or you're coming back from an injury and you're looking to build that confidence, it's just really important to be able to have that scope and that understanding of when and where you need to do that. And it's still something that I struggle with. You know, I go in there and some days I have intentions and I miss and I start feeling really good and I roll too hard. Whatever, water under the bridge, new day. But this new perspective is gained from how severe that injury was. So the other thing that I'll show you here too on YouTube. The other thing that I integrated, and this is something I feel confident sharing with anyone who's looking to either help come back from any kind of compression injury, like a herniation. And this is just one way to do this, but these are called teeter boots. They work with a barbell or with a pull-up bar, but you basically hook your feet into them, strap them on. These are like $100 on Amazon. Again, not a sponsorship. It's just a product I use. And they allow you to hang upside down. Another alternative would be like an inversion table. I would prefer an inversion table. I just don't have the space. But if you think about how we exist, we're constantly upright, walking, running, or seated, or laying down. It's very rare that you are completely upside down and having gravity pull from the bottom of your feet through the top of your head versus how we experience life, which is gravity pulling from the top of your head through towards your feet. So Drew had prescribed 10 sets of 30 seconds hanging upside down. And the goal here was to, over this 6-week period, create very, very small improvements in decompression of the spinal column. So lumbar, thoracic, and cervical. We didn't have a way to measure this. We weren't doing an MRI every week to see what the distance was of improvement. I didn't go back and do another MRI once I felt better. So take it with a grain of salt. This could be, completely scientifically unfounded. But what I can say from personal experience and having not used this in the past is that this routine of doing that every single morning left me feeling taller. And that sensation of feeling taller did create another sensation of decompression in and around my neck that in the beginning was not as pronounced, but over a 6-week period of doing that every single day for essentially 5 minutes, and we built up to 10, that's a lot of time. When you compound that over a month, that's a lot of minutes that I'm spending letting gravity pull the other way through my spine. It's challenging in the beginning to relax because your body wants to fight in that position. So it probably took 2 weeks to even become comfortable with holding myself upside down. The glutes really want to stay engaged. Hamstrings really want to stay engaged. And it's challenging with the teeter boots to stay disengaged at the ankle without feeling like you're going to slide out. That's why I like the inversion table better. But that was a great addition. That's also linked in the show notes. I don't get a kickback for that. I don't get an Amazon affiliate kickback either, but it's there for you if you're interested. Those are the ones that I use. Inversion tables are also great. So I want to talk briefly about mindset. This was a big walk away, big takeaway for me with this injury. It made me think a lot about it because I've sustained injuries at different points in my career as an athlete, from time as a skier to various injuries, weightlifting that were, minor, but still made me take a step back, and then ultimately jiu-jitsu. And the reality is, if you play sports, if you move, if you're active, whether that be mountain biking, hiking, surfing, doing jiu-jitsu, playing pickup football, all these sports I listed, I've been injured playing each one of those, actually, even hiking. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. How you handle it happening is the difference between maintaining an active lifestyle, provided it is not an acute event that prevents you from doing that, and developing a sense of fear and wanting to stay away from things. It's very easy to get injured in a sport and just go, never going to do that again. This was a scale that I weighed with mountain biking. I had mountain biked for years when I was younger. I picked it up again as an adult, had an awesome time. And then there were like 2 times where I took a really bad slam, very bad, like full face, helmet, gear, pads, everything, and just absolutely packed it into the dirt in my 30s. And I got up from that and was like, I love mountain biking, but I like surfing and jiu-jitsu way more. So this is kind of a no-brainer for me. The risk isn't worth the reward. I don't want to eat shit like this anymore. So I stopped. And those are decisions you ultimately have to make one day. But preparing for them via strength training is the best mitigator for injury risk that you can have by improving range of motion in your joints, stability in each joint, mobility where it's needed, and then a body that can create force against the ground, but also accept force from the ground or from an opponent. Those abilities form in the training hall. So when you're out and you're training jiu-jitsu and someone shoots a double leg and you have to redistribute all that force that they're applying against you into your body and then out into the floor, change position and get a dominant position, your ability to do that safely is going to be largely due to how you train and prepare yourself. Of course, you could be young and generally athletic and get by for a really long time and never get hurt. That happens all the time. There's plenty of gifted people that do that. You could be ungifted and unathletic and also just roll the dice and get snake eyes every single time for the whole time you do jiu-jitsu, but it's extremely unlikely. So getting in the gym, preparing your body to the best of your ability, it's really going to let you have more fun in the things that you like to do because you're going to be able to do them at a lower risk. There's always acute injuries. Someone can land on your knee and hyperextend it, and it doesn't matter if you squat 350 pounds. When that happens, your knee's going to go, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But for a lot of rotational, flexion, extension injuries, by training properly, you can mitigate them. We talked a lot about this on those 2 episodes with Mike Prekarski. Some of this is just luck. You get guys like Derrick Rose who just have bum knees and their career gets shot. You got guys that get injured more than others. Dustin Poirier has been more injury prone than some other guys. You have TJ Dillashaw, more injury prone. It's just part of sport. But how you think about it as a practitioner, as an athlete, is going to set you up best for when it happens. Because if you're in the gym and you're training, you're trying to prevent yourself from getting hurt. And you know that if that were to happen, you have a system in place or the people in place where you can reach out to and get guidance. Then you can quickly form a path back to doing what you want to do if it's important to you, if that's something that you care about. If it's not what you care, if you get hurt doing jiu-jitsu one time, you go, you know what, I don't really like this. Fine. That's totally cool. You don't have to do it. But if it's something you care about, if you're doing a sport or an activity that you care about, you should have a little bit of that in place where you're going, okay, you know what, if I caught a fin to the face, which I did surfing, and cut below my eye like about 2 inches, if that happens, I'm going to accept that I'm not going to be surfing for a bit, right? Because I got stitches, I had to take care of it and not let it get infected. But if surfing was the only thing in my world, that would have been harder to handle. So you just prepare yourself mentally for the fact that you might get hurt doing the things you love. And I don't mean that tongue in cheek, because some people go, oh yeah, well, whatever. It's just, of course you're going to get hurt. True. But do you have a system to get back there safely? How many people do you know on the mats that have been nursing an injury for like 8 years and it's still bad? Their knee still pops out of place all the time. Their shoulder still dislocates when they're rolling and they go, oh, fuck. And you're like, are you good? Are you good? And they go, my shoulder just popped out. Hold on. Bam. And they pop it in. Dude, go get with a physical therapist. Come up with a good plan. Build some strength around your shoulder girdle. Put some strength overhead and stability. And then train. It's just, in my opinion, it's smart. The best athletes do these things. We all don't have the resources of the best athletes, but we can emulate their behaviors. And that's going to help us do the things that we love and be an example for other people. And if you're a higher belt at your academy and you're all busted up and everything's broken on you and you can't roll the way you want to, that's setting an example for people that are just starting. Imagine you're a white belt, you come in and you look around and you go, holy shit, man, everyone here is super broken. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They're all not doing the things off the mat to keep themselves healthy. And their attitude about it, it's like, well, just, rub some elbow grease on it. That person's not going to stick around. But if you come in and whenever people in higher positions are hurt or they're coming back from injury, they're proactive about it. They got a good head about them. They got a plan. That's really reassuring for someone coming in, someone who's new to it. So I think that is somewhat of an intangible. It's hard to see that when you're experienced at something. But we talked a lot about that on the ski team, like how you carry yourself as an older athlete, as a leader on the team. It's having a huge impact on younger athletes that you don't even realize, and you might not even never know, because they won't come up to you and say that. And sometimes it's a lack of awareness. They don't know how to communicate that to you. But when you're a younger athlete, you look up to those more senior people and you want to emulate their behavior because they're doing what you want to do at a level that you haven't yet achieved. So I think as martial artists, as athletes, as coaches, as people, it's on us to be an example of how to take care of ourselves to the younger athletes and other people that are coming up for the first time. And that's not even taking into account that, some of these people might be trying to find jiu-jitsu because they've been hurt in other things. And they want to learn how to take care of themselves and protect themselves and learn how to literally stand up for themselves in life. And they need examples on how to do that. So it's a little bit of a soapbox rant there, but it's something that's really important to me. And I think it's important for us, anyone who considers himself a martial artist, to be an example in a positive way on the whole cycle of what it means to be a martial artist. Which is an odd segue to shout out Zevia, sugar-free, 0 sugar soda. Really tastes like soda. Not a sponsor. Should be a sponsor. Not a sponsor. No kickbacks here. All right, let's talk about hips. So if anyone definitely in combat sports, but I'm thinking in my head, I would almost argue any sport, wants to begin to train for it, to do some of the things we've been talking about, mitigating the risk of injury, limiting that risk, increasing their performance. One of the most important things you can do is learn how to develop strength and power, so the ability to move objects quickly, in your hips. You can readily see this in any sport if you look up triple extension. The term triple extension, often used in Olympic weightlifting, because you see it in the clean. You also see it in, if you freeze frame it, you'll see it in the jerk right before the barbell leaves their collarbone. But triple extension is extension at the ankle, extension at the knee, and extension at the hip. So if you look at a body from the side and you had a person sit down into a chair, you're going to see a couple of things happen. As they sit right around their waistband, their hips are going to flex, and that starts to form that L at their hips. The knee joint is going to flex. So it's starting to form 90 degrees as their hips go behind them. And then their ankle is going to flex a little bit. So it starts to close that angle as they plantar flex their foot. Sorry, dorsiflex their foot. So dorsiflexion is your toes coming up towards your shin. Plantar flexion is ballet, pointing your toes away from you. So you see this little accordion happen when someone sits into a chair. If you went up to that person and you took a really big tarantula and you set it right next to him and you tapped him on the shoulder and you pointed at it, they would jump out of that chair so fucking fast. And if you freeze frame that, what you will see is the same thing that you see in an Olympic weightlifter, in a sprinter, in a sprawling wrestler, and in a judoka or a jiu-jitsu player. That they move forward and their ankle extends, so they drive their toes into the floor. Their knee extends, so it starts to open back up from this close, and their hip extends. So their hips go forward, and that triple extension of those three joints creates that upward motion of a jump. So this movement is anatomically available to most people, that because of that example, almost anyone that you put a big ass tarantula next to that doesn't know it's there and you show it to them, they're going to jump, and they're going to jump automatically, and they will do the thing that gets them out of the seat the fastest to avoid the perceived threat. And this will happen in an amount of time much faster than they can download and assess and realize that it's a non-poisonous spider and their friend just put it there and it's a joke. In sport, this is happening as well. If someone shoots a takedown on you and you sprawl, you go into triple extension naturally because that's how a sprawl is done. If you're a sprinter and you drive off the blocks, the very first thing that happens is you triple extend the foot on the back block. You can see, again, you can freeze frame this with runners and you'll see a straight line going from their ankle all the way through their hip. So with triple extension, it's an essential part of almost every single sport, yet it's very undertrained and it's actually challenging to replicate in a training hall. I think mostly because of it becomes cognitive. You're now thinking about it and it's hard to do. So it's also a challenge because now you're loading it. And when you load something, it becomes even more challenging under stress. So doing something like a clean, it looks very easy when you watch an Olympic weightlifter do it, but it's a harder skill to master, to get contact at the right point of the body and to time the extension of your ankle, your knees, and your hips to propel the bar upward as you transfer force through your hips and allow enough time to get underneath it and then receive the bar. So I urge people to train hip extension often and in their training in various ways. You want to be able to do it quickly. That would be like jumping, like power cleans, box jumps. You want to be able to train it under stress and control it. Things like a deadlift, eccentric squats, the standing up portion of a squat. And you want to be able to train it fast. That would also be like a power clean, but other things like a kettlebell swing, where you're driving your hips forward explosively, repeatedly, and stabilizing. A lot of these examples that I just said don't have ankle extension on purpose because not everything is a jump. So things like a deadlift, a front squat, a back squat, and even a kettlebell swing, unless you're purposefully adding in ankle extension, it's not going to be part of the traditional movement. So you would see this if you did like a deadlift into a clean pull, or if you did like a trap bar deadlift with a shoulder shrug at the top. You could come up onto the toes, get triple extension, and then lift with the traps and drive the barbell even higher or the trap bar even higher. So clean pulls are actually a really good way to overload triple extension to then build up the actual competitive lifts, the clean, jerk, and the snatch. So you'll see them do that often with straps on their hands. So you're overloading the glutes and the hamstrings to extend the hips under pressure. And then you're adding in that last little drive through the ankle extension to replicate the movement. But this is really important for going back to what I said earlier. They're happening in the sports all the time, and you're going to do them naturally, passively, when you respond to the action of an opponent or something else moving in your sport. So if it's not trained in the gym and strength and stability are not added to it, it becomes one of the more risky things. If someone's driving into you, trying to get a single leg, and you sprawl and you have poor hip mechanics under stress, now you're talking about a risk because you're taking that position and you're putting it in an unstable environment due to lack of ability, lack of proprioception, right? Knowing where your body is in space as it responds to the action in real time. So I urge people to add these exercises to their training. A lot of apps will do this already. Things like Juggernaut app that I spoke about in the previous solo episode do a great job of maintaining hip extension in there and powerful movements with the hips, obviously, because it's a jiu-jitsu app developed by Chad Wesley Smith, who's an awesome programmer. I did a whole episode on that, so I won't dive into it. But making sure that these things are things that you do when you're training will help you reduce that risk of injury. And if you don't know what to do, and I mean this super sincerely, if you don't know what to do in the gym, or you want to start to reduce the risk of injury and you don't know how, or you want to come back from an injury, reach out to me directly, either via social media, in the comments on Spotify, on the YouTube channel. You can email me at the website, any of these different spots, and I'll help you. I want people to feel healthy and happy training jiu-jitsu, training for the sports that they love. And I want to do the part as much as I can. And if I'm not the right person to help you, I will help point you in the right direction. But part of this community that I'm trying to build here in this audience, I live by this every single day, and I want to help share it with anyone that I can. So if you're unsure about what to do when you're in the training hall outside of just doing jiu-jitsu, send me a message and I'll help out as best I can. I guess I'll just give my two favorite exercises for this, because I've competed in Olympic weightlifting. I've strength trained for sports, specifically in 2 different sports. Well, 3 if you include Olympic weightlifting. Strength and conditioning specifically for skiing, which is a lot of power work, a little bit of endurance work, but it's short bursts because your ski run's never going to be longer than 26 seconds if you're a really slow mogul skier. They're skiing now in, I think, 22-ish seconds. So you are all out power for 22 seconds. I've trained jiu-jitsu now for 5 years, and all my training in the last 5 years has been catered specifically to this. And then when I was Olympic weightlifting, I was catering all my training to that. So I understand a lot of the variation in how different exercises perform in other sports. And there's things that are just true in general, like if you are X strong and you take yourself to Y strong, so you just increase your strength relative to your body weight as an individual, likely you will begin to perform at all the things that you like to do better. Your body is going to have adaptations that help you in everything else you do. Plus, strength training builds proprioception. It helps you understand where your body is in space, and it helps you utilize that proprioception to make athletic movements. So changes of direction, absorbing and redistribution of force generation, all these kind of things. So when I look at something like jiu-jitsu, there's 2 exercises that always stick out as very valuable. One is a strength exercise and one is a power exercise. For strength, having a strong deadlift is, again, in my eyes, invaluable in jiu-jitsu, because a lot of time you're in that flexed hip loaded position where your hips are flexed and they're behind you, your knees are flexed and they're in front of you, and you're in a lower position. So you can think of this as you're starting stand up and you're beginning to exchange and grappling, right? That position that you operate from is like the mid portion of a deadlift. So being strong in that position, having strength there in the concentric and eccentric portion of the movement, becomes really important for what you're actually doing. Deadlift also great for building total body strength, because you have to hold the weight and you have to create the force to move the weight. So it is unlike, not to devalue squats, because I think that they're invaluable, but you load the squat onto yourself. You're not gripping it to support it. And because jiu-jitsu is a grip heavy sport, I choose, if I have to take one exercise onto the island and I get a squat or a deadlift, I'm going to bring the deadlift because of the grip strength part of that. The other exercise I would choose is a power clean. And I choose a power clean for a couple different reasons. One, it is less difficult to master the mechanics of a power clean than a full clean. It's also less difficult to manage if you do hang cleans into your power clean. So from the knees and power cleaning. That's also still a very applicable use of power generation and triple extension in the hips that's going to transfer to the things you love without having to invest a ton of time in skill development. One of the hardest parts about Olympic weightlifting is just learning how to Olympic weightlift. It's extremely technical, even if you're athletic. So it takes a long time to catch your technical ability up with your strength. You could have a really heavy front squat and a really heavy back squat, but if you have poor clean mechanics, you're not going to be able to move the weight and create the hang time to get underneath it and reposition the weight. So using something like a hang power clean or a hang clean or a power clean, it allows you to work the quickness, work the power, work the speed, and do it at a moderately heavy weight that then helps you transfer to sport. So you don't have to dedicate all this time to becoming an Olympic weightlifter to develop the skill of the movement to then take it into the sport that you love doing. So I would urge people to invest time, if they can, into prioritizing those 2 exercises for hip extension. In the power clean, you also get a little stabilization when you receive the weight that is the quarter version of a front squat. So again, if you had limited time and you're just trying to choose bang for your buck exercises, I think that they're great. I don't want this to sound like the other ones don't matter, because if you have the time, doing a front squat is great for jiu-jitsu. I mean, if you took someone in the bottom of a front squat and you put them on their back on the floor, that's playing guard pretty much. So you see a lot of these utilizations of joint range of motion, loading, ability to support weight. All those things are going to transfer. They're going to make you a better athlete. They're going to make you stronger, more powerful, and they're going to help you on the mats. All right. I hope that was helpful. Like I said before, if you enjoy these, please engage with me, because otherwise I don't know. If the solo episodes are important to you and you think that I should keep doing them, shoot me a message on Spotify. I will respond 100%. If you're enjoying the YouTube content, like and subscribe. As they say, it's corny, but it really does help. Likes push the videos, subscriptions help expose the channel. So either of those go a long way. And then for those of you that have taken the time to leave the 5-star review, thank you. And those that want to support it, you can always do that on Spotify. You just click the little hamburger menu, rate this show 5 stars, and submit. We got some exciting guests coming up this month, and there's an extra exciting episode being recorded at the end of the month that I know that everyone's going to enjoy a lot. It'll be funny and it'll be informative. So stay tuned. Thank you so much. I hope you all have safe training. Hey friends, Abe here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode and sticking around to the very end. If you want to support it, leave a 5-star review on Spotify or check out www.maynideapodcast.com. Join the mailing list and stay up to date on all things The Mayn Idea, from future guests, sponsorship opportunities, products that I'm using to help me perform at my best, invites to ask me anything, and any upcoming pertinent information to the show. I cannot do this show without you. It is literally why I show up each week and put these episodes together. So thank you from the bottom of my heart from being part of the community. I hope you have a great day.